the more and more of these conversations that we have, the more and more I realize two things. One, I really enjoy having them. It doesn't even have to be like real estate specific stuff. And two, I don't know, man, it's kept me in this perpetual state of learning. And I think that the world can benefit, can benefit from hearing other people's stories and the trials and tribulations and stuff they've been through in a super informal way. So I appreciate you making the time to chat with me.
Yeah, no, of course. It's I know that you are an avid learner about a multitude of different things. I feel like anytime I'm looking at you, you are learning about sleep or new supplements or like running is the new thing, right? So, super interesting person. I like the variable. I like that, probably 60-70% of your content is real estate driven. A lot is personal driven. And I feel they intertwine really, really well, given what you do, given what Humanize and everything does too, and your background with Zillow and eHomes and everything like that. So it's really interesting on my side to kind of see your journey too, since you've kind of left Zillow. It's cool.
It's funny you say that, man, because what I'm starting to realize that like I put out content for obviously like to share ideas and stuff, but also like I want to be able to look back on this one day and laugh my ass off. Right. And like, holy shit. Like dude, what was I thinking? Like I've had those moments even looking back a couple of years. So it's also like this super cool kind of like time capsule for myself. If I catalog everything I'm doing later in life, I'll be able to look back on it and go, dude, what the fuck was that guy doing? So cool, man. Karl, it'd be super cool, obviously, for people that are going to be listening to this in the future to kind of get a little bit of a context as to who you are and what your story is. Obviously, I know you and I have talked, but I think a 30,000 foot view of like your journey to where you're at now would be super cool and probably give us some great talking points to kind of jump into this.
Yeah. So, kind of going from recent to past. So right now I'm at Zillow. I've been at Zillow for about 3 years. I'm in multifamily now. I was a flex advisor. I was a flex advisor for a year. I was a sales executive PA for a year, but kind of just very top level. What got me to the States? I'm originally born and raised in Ireland. All my family are still there, parents, siblings, all the fun stuff.
I can kind of get the little bit of accent still, very little, but it still exists.
It's a Zillow voice and a non-Zillow voice. Obviously, when you're working in phone sales, right, last thing you want to do is like go heavy and people are like, I have no idea what you just said to me, right?
Yeah.
So if anyone's watching and they're new to sales or like that, definitely want to be clear and concise when you're pitching people on the phone. So I kind of developed a Zillow voice and non-Zillow voice, but I left home when I was 17. So I was international athlete, competed at highest level swimming. I swam for Ireland in multitude of different competitions from, I think I did my first international competition when I was 12. So so I was really young in the game. I come from a sporting family. I have a brother that was professional soccer player, professional football player. I had a couple of sisters that were really big in karate, tennis, another one that swam as well. So I'm the youngest of 6.
Interesting. Is that like, so like the whole family was involved in that thing. So it was almost like natural inclination to get into athletics, right?
Yeah, it came from my mom more so than anything. So a lot of people don't know this, but Ireland in kind of 60s and 70s was a very male dominated society. It was the husband went out, worked. It's a very blue collar manual labor country. A lot of tradespeople. My father, he worked in quarries. He drove mixers like that, had concrete and mortar and stuff to building sites. So that was his day to day. Yeah, like I said, there's 6 kids there that he was supporting. My mom was a housewife, and there was a lot of limitations for Irish women kind of over those age. And even my grandma, like my mom was an incredible musician. She had a scholarship to go to the London School of Music. And my grandma wouldn't let her go because she was like, no, your job is to have kids and like raise a family. Like you can.
That's wild. It's crazy to think about that, man. I think, especially in the United States, I feel, and I'm not going to get super political because I could go down a rabbit hole, but like hearing that, I think people forget like how good we have it. And sometimes, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different places in the world, and to hear that like a little bit more old school of a mentality, like that exists and that's a real thing. And I think people need to remember that. So that's awesome, dude. So mom pushed you guys into sports. You're the youngest of how many siblings you said?
We're 6. So I've got 5 siblings, 4 sisters and a brother.
Wow. That's wild, man. So what's the age difference? I'm curious between the youngest and the oldest.
So I'm 33. My oldest sister is 51. So there's like an
Wow.
18-year-ish gap. Yeah.
That's wild, man. So your journey, mom was stay-at-home housewife, right? Getting you guys all involved in sports. How did you get into swimming? So you said you've got a brother who played professional football and some sisters that were really high in martial arts, I think you said. How did your journey start into swimming? Because obviously competing at those levels, you almost got to enjoy it or have like a natural inclination for it, right? So how did that all get started?
I just talked to my mom about this. I want to say less than a month ago because I didn't really know how I started either. I remember like when I went to my first club team, but I never knew like why swimming, right? Because up until the age of 10, I swam, I boxed, and I played football. And then my mom was like, "You got to pick one. You got to figure out what you're doing."
Yeah.
And this is like, I'm not driving you here and then driving you there and driving you here. Like that's just not how it's going to work. So
Sure.
but apparently I was really good at water when I was younger, like kid, like 2, 3, very comfortable. A lot of kids are not as comfortable. I was apparently pretty comfortable as a kid. My youngest sister to me, there's a 4 years, 10-month gap between the two of us. She swam, she was talented, and we actually came from a very lower middle class area, and there was no swim clubs around us. We had to go to kind of like a high, like kind of a posh area to swim.
Interesting.
And they wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us for like a year and a half because of like our area code. Pretty much, they were like, "No, you guys can't swim here." So my mom had to like fight heavily to get my sister into the program. And then they just happened to switch head coaches, and she was like, "Hey, like my son is 5, he's taking swim lessons. They say he's like way too good for the swim lessons that they're able to teach. Like this is just a second job for this teacher. Like they're not actually someone that is very, detailed. Like they're not a coach, right? They're not dedicated. This is like their second job." So I was like, "How do I get in here?" So that guy came from a completely different area, didn't care about zip codes or any of that crap. He was just like, "You know what? Bring him in. Let's go." And I started swimming there when I was 5. My sister would have been like 9.5-ish. Swam for the same club team. And then I actually worked with him all the way through my entire swimming career until I retired when I was 24. That was my coach. And that got, it's kind of crazy. Like he's like a second father to me because we spent swimming is such a sport where it's, when you get to the elite level, so much training. It's 35, 40 hours a week. It's early mornings. It's, early morning, go to school, come back, go to gym, go back and swim again. And it's different than, training 3 or 4 times a week for soccer or football like that. This is an everyday thing.
So that's interesting that you found your way to the coach that was going to work with you into adulthood, right? I feel like that probably doesn't happen very frequently. So when you got into it, you were what age again when you actually started swimming competitively?
I had my first competition when I was 7. Like actual, like competing against other people. So I started swimming when I was 5 and competed when I was 7.
So when you're 7 and you're getting into this thing, I guess the question that would come up is like progressing through the levels of this thing. I think to compete at that level of like athletics, right? It's like the 1% of the 1%, right? Is the way I think about it. So getting into that, what was the moment where you're like, "Hey, I want to really go for this"? Because I think what ends up happening, and this can be applied to anything, this can be applied to just life in general or like kids in athletics, adults trying to get good at something. There's a moment where it changes from like, "Hey, I want to be good at this" to "Holy shit, I want to be the best at this." Right. And I think that moment is something that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot. So how did you know when you were like, "Hey," because obviously it's a decision, right? It doesn't just happen where you're like, "Hey, I'm going to compete at the most elite levels of athletics on the planet." It's like, hey, you made a decision at some point that you were like, "Hey, I'm going to fucking go for this thing." What did that look like, and around what age did that happen at?
I would say it started at 7. So it started when I competed because I had a sister that swam like with me, same club, same team, that was like 5 years older. I was around a lot more older people because of that age gap, right? So her friends, because I grew up the youngest of 6, I was always usually around older people anyway, just because of the friends of my siblings that would come in. So in the swimming environment, I was around older people with my sister, and I remember just being like, "I want to be better than this guy. I want to be better than this guy." Like, I want to beat my sister, first of all. I was like, just 5 years up. I was like, I want to be like a 7-year-old that beats a teenager, right? And then I'd be like, okay, my sister, my sister, she don't care. She wasn't that good. Like, she was fine. So like beating my sister for me was like, oh, that was just bragging rights at home, right? And then her
Yeah.
friends like that swam in the club, they were really good. And I was like, well, I'm gonna beat her. And then it turned to like when I was getting older, because like you don't really have that mentality at that young of an age when you're like, I want to beat him, and it's this gigantic man that's standing beside you, right? Chest hair, beard, and everything. You're like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna beat that guy when I'm 7, right? So I kind of started like looking at the really good women on the team, and I was like, I'm gonna beat her. Like she has the record, I'm gonna beat that record, and I'm gonna beat the men's record. And then it was like the more I got kind of immersed in swimming, more competitions I did, like Ireland, like you would see people from the north of Ireland come down and be like, I never saw you try before, I'm gonna beat this guy. And then I'd beat that guy, and then I'd be like, oh, I get to go to a competition in England now. And I was like, oh, there's so many people better than me here. What's going on here? Like what are they doing that I'm not doing? I want to beat these guys. So it just refreshing, like based on kind of exposure.
Yeah, and it's funny because naturally, from like a dude, I've read into like the psychology and like not even past the psychology, like the biology of of being competitive, right? And it usually stems from like goes way back into like when we were competing for like breeding rights, right? Like that's where that comes from, right? You want to beat the other man so that you can procreate, right? It's interesting to hear that even at a young age, at like 7, 8, 9 years old, before you really, because that's a biological urge to compete, right? That usually happens. You're like a teenager, right? Your hormones turn on, and you're like, okay, world domination. I'm going to crush everybody, right? At least some people. So it's interesting to hear at a young age because that kind of goes counterintuitive to everything I've kind of heard around why we compete and stuff, right? I've got some friends that are doctors that I've talked about this extensively, and they're like, dude, it's testosterone, right? Your body started like there's not a bunch of testosterone coursing through your veins when you're 7. That's more of a mindset thing, right? That it sounds almost intrinsic, right? It doesn't sound like something that you learn, like you just naturally had this urge of like, hey, I want to compete, I want to win, I want to beat this person. So that's wild, man. So got into it at 7 or 8, competed. When did you really hit your stride where it was like, okay, cool, I'm good at this? And was it like I'm good at this naturally situation, or did you work your ass off to be good at it, or was it both?
I was a very talented swimmer and not a very talented athlete. Like give me a basketball, like I'll break a window, dude. Like honestly, like he was a very, very talented swimmer. And what I did, I worked my ass off. Like I worked my ass off every single day. And it wasn't because like when we kind of spoke about this last week, I was thinking back, like I never wanted to be the best at it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be better than someone every single time. And I would always figure out someone was like, oh, this dude from Italy swam this time. I want to beat this guy. So it wasn't like I want to be the best in the world. I want to win an Olympic gold medal. Right? I think that's everyone's dream once they kind of mature a little bit and they can understand how big of a task that is. But for me, it was the baby steps of like, I just want to beat this guy, and I want to beat this guy, and I want to beat this guy. And then it got to the point where, like, I think I said this to you as well. You have to win. When you've done it for so long, you have to win. Yeah. And the hard part about that is, I don't want to say normal people and feel like an ego here, but a lot of people can't relate to that mentality because it becomes an obsession, right? And I feel like that's the key differentiator as my mind started to develop, and why I became so good at what I did is because the passion turned from something that I enjoyed to do that I was obsessed to do. I was obsessed with beating that person. I was obsessed with not losing, not winning, not losing.
Yeah.
So from 13 to 24, I never lost one single race in Ireland, in Irish swimming.
Wow.
Not one single race.
Yeah.
And that was like, I was some people were tapering, which means they were rested, and they were, really trying to do like personal best times at events that I knew that I needed to do a personal best time because I was shooting for Europeans or world championships, not Irish nationals. So I'd be peaking for something else, but I still couldn't mentally, I still couldn't let someone beat me. So it was,
it sounds really
weird kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that, man, because there's a constant debate. The conversations that you and I were having the other night, I have those with like 4 or 5 of my friends constantly, right? There's always some text going about the psychology around winning or the why we're pushing, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting to hear you say that, because I'm always arguing that, to speak for myself personally, I feel like a lot more of the time I'm running away from failure and not necessarily towards success, right? I'm running away from losing, to your point, more than I am towards winning. So what do you think is a stronger motivator? I mean, I think for everyone it's going to be a little different, but were you more motivated by not losing or by the winning part specifically?
I was more motivated to, and I know this gets talked about a lot, of proving people wrong, right? So I know I'm a big dude now. Like I'm 220 pounds. Like when I swam, I was like like in college, like 140 wet on, wet max, right? So I was a tiny little skinny kid, and I wasn't that tall, 5'10", 5'11". I can't remember what I was in college, but like 5'10", 5'11", probably 140. Pretty small for a swimmer. When you look at people like Michael Phelps, full body, long arms, I didn't have any of that. All I had was that I was I was incredible at the sport. The event that I swam, I was really, really technically good at it. So I just had to have cardio and all the other stuff kind of catch up to it. But for me, what I was chasing was, I loved the fact that when I was on TV and when I was on camera or photos, or when people saw me behind the block, that it was like this, and then there was me, and then it was everyone else. And everyone would just laugh seeing this child compete against grown men. And then I would just dominate them. And the issue, I never really loved doing it either. It was just because I was where I was at such a young age, I just never got scared. I never got nervous. I never got anything, because I just knew that I was just look around, perfect. Here's other dudes that I'm just going to destroy. I just ruin their ego for the rest of their life, that they got beat by this tiny little kid.
Yeah, man, I think about that a lot. So I'm working with a performance coach actively, right? I'm in this program. It's called HOS, Human Optimization Systems. And I got in a beta with some mutual friends that I knew. And the whole premise of this company is it's performance coaches for everyone, right? So instead of elite athletes and high-level CEOs and stuff getting these performance coaches to help kind of get to that peak state, their idea is to bring it to everyone. So I've been working with this woman, Erin, now for like 4 or 5 months. And we talk a lot about, I guess the thing, the how I'm trying to articulate this is what you were just saying, that need to prove something, right? I used to think for the longest time, and when you read self-help books or kind of like go down that whole rabbit hole, they talk a lot about not needing to prove anything, not being attached to outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. And it's almost counterintuitive to just, I guess, man's, right? Not you're talking from an ego standpoint, but like man's desire to win and conquer and go and do big things. I feel like it's almost starting to get suppressed, right? Like by the world, like it's not cool to be competitive anymore. And I'm like, no. I feel like that's my superpower. Right? I don't really have, I still have a lot of shit to prove, but to your point, like that is what puts me into a 7th gear, the need to prove something, right? I didn't grow up super affluent, grew up in a house where there weren't enough cookies in the cookie jar pretty frequently, and like had a really kind of wild childhood. I felt a need since being that kid, right? To your point, that skinny, scrawny kid who like got into the workforce at 19 years old to go, I'm going to fucking win. I'm going to do this on my own accord. So that's interesting, man. And I think, without speaking from a place of ego, I think that's a thing that top performers will understand and other folks won't necessarily understand too much, right? Like when you really get into that different gear, and it's not to say that not everyone is capable of being in that 7th gear. It's just, you find it not because it's what I'm hearing with you and what I'm thinking about while you're talking is the same thing. It's like, you don't find that 7th gear because of joy and like a positive emotion. You find that 7th gear because you're like, yo, I'm gonna fuck this thing up. I wouldn't say it's a negative state of mind, but it's definitely not this desire to go and be great, right? It's a desire to go and kick everyone's ass, right? That kind of drives that. So that's cool.
You have to, Chris. Like you have to have that, because if you don't have it, like there are people that are bigger, that are better, that are stronger, that are faster, that have more money. That's like, if you don't have that, I'm just going to go and I'm just going to rip everyone apart. If you don't have that mentality, you will, and I've said this to you, there's very few people in the world that will ever understand being great at something, right? And I was thinking about this from a real estate perspective, right? So, perfect example, you had fantastic success with eHomes, right?
Yep.
If we take a brokerage like Berkshire Hathaway, everywhere on the, like all across the United States, huge brokerage, right? You have teams within the brokerage. You're a top performer on your team. The equivalent of what I did in sport, in swimming, was if you were the best person on your team at your brokerage in Newport, right?
Yep.
And then you were the best person at the brokerage, not on your team. You were the top performer at that brokerage.
Yep.
And then you were the top performer of every single brokerage in the United States, right?
Yep.
That's still good. Now imagine that there was a unified approach to real estate where every global entry in the world was measured on the exact same scale, and you were in the top 10 of every single person that practiced real estate in the entire world. 7 billion people. There were 9 people that were better than you. That's great. And I feel like, dude, that's something that is not cheap.
Yeah, it's, again, not, you and I can have these conversations because I think we're both self-aware enough to like know when our ego flares, right? And I know there are certain circumstances and I've had in my life where I'm like, yo, that thing reared its ugly head. But for the most part, as I've gotten older and I've kind of learned to work with it, it's almost like your shadow, right? It's this kind of ugly competitive part of you. People don't necessarily need to know that I wake up trying to figure out how to bury them, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I don't need to go up on, I've seen people do this, but I don't need to go on social media and be like, yo, everyone else that's in my space, I hope you're fucking working harder than me because I'm coming for you. I'm going to eat your fucking lunch, right?
Yeah.
But that shadow that wants and talks and thinks like that, I think it's getting suppressed, dude. People are afraid to push themselves to that level. And after I've thought about this for a long time, I think there are a ton of people who think like that, but are afraid to kind of let it out. Or they're afraid to, like, to your point, right? Like truly being great at something. I think it's like a balance between comfort and discomfort. To get to that level of great, you're going to experience a lot of fucking pain on the way up, right? You're going to sacrifice big pieces of your life. Like I think about, I'm nowhere near great yet, right? I put myself, I think the last thing I did when I was at eHomes and built that team, it put me pretty good locally. What I'm trying to do now is I really want to fucking take it to that next level. And I know that road is a long, hard road, but like the amount of sacrifice that it takes to really push yourself to that level, like, dude, I'm fucking giving up like time with my wife. I'm giving up time like just in my life in general. I'm sacrificing now for this chase. So it's wild, man. And I will say this, I don't think there's ever been a better feeling than pursuing it. There's like that, and I'm sure you've experienced that, right? It's like you're on a fucking noble journey, man. It's like King Arthur's knights, right? Like you're going and doing something that matters. That doesn't mean it doesn't suck at some point, right? And you're not tired and burnt out, but it's fucking wild, dude. So we've talked now about the performance aspect of this and like motivators and stuff. So let's talk a little bit about like when you did get to the pinnacle, when you did get to that point where you're like, yo, I'm fucking top 10 in the world. There's whatever it is, right? 9,999,999 people that are worse than me. And there's like 8 that are better than me. What did that look like? And how did you feel? Because I can imagine at that point in time, you probably, I don't know, maybe you didn't feel like you were on top of the world. Maybe you felt like there was still work to do. But what did that moment look like where you were like, fuck, dude, I kind of made it?
I realized I made it about 5 years ago. So
after the fact,
like I retired at 24. So probably about 28, 29, was I actually able to sit back and look at all the records that I'd held, all the trophies, the medals, and be like, you know what? Like, fuck, like I was really good at this. I was really, I was great at something. But the problem is when you know you're great at something, you get comfortable. When you're comfortable, you're not great at anything. It's as simple as that, because your driving factor is uncomfortable. Like there's 2 seats in a Ferrari and there's 50 seats on a bus for a reason, right? You sacrifice so much to get that you cut out a lot of people, and it's not on purpose. It's just people, a lot of people just don't understand. Like for me, people always say, hey, you're so lucky you got to go to Finland, to Spain, to France, Italy, to Japan, China, all these incredible countries in the world at such a young age. Like all in my teens, I got to go experience this.
Yeah.
But I also gave away my teen years. I wasn't drinking in fields. I wasn't at nightclubs. I wasn't at bars. I wasn't doing lads' holidays and vacations in like Ibiza or something like that in Spain, right? I sacrificed all of the fun teen years so I could get to that point. But the problem is, because it moves so quickly and because you're training every day and swimming is pretty much a year-round sport, you don't get to stop and look back and go, wow, look at all the stuff that I've done, because there's always the next competition, the next training session. You got to get back in the water, get back on the horse. Like you got to keep going for it. So you don't really get to appreciate what you've gone through.
So I think it would be good, man, to be that great. I think it would be cool for people to hear let me shut my fucking thing up. This thing's going to keep beeping. All right. Walk me through a little bit of what did a day look like for you? What did a week look like for you when you were at the pinnacle? Because one of the things that I'm starting to see is people underestimate the amount of work it takes to really make it, right? To really get it good. I think my generation, at least specifically, is like the generation of we want it now, and we want it with little to no friction, right? And our entire lives, we've been told, you're special, you can do anything you want. They left out the part where like, hey, it cracks me up, dude. I used to tell people this all the time about real estate specifically, and it applies in life as well. Like, oh, in real estate, there's no ceiling. You can make as much money as you want. I'm like, yeah. What they also don't tell you is there's no fucking floor, and the floor is made of lava, right? And like, people dramatically underestimate the amount of work and dedication and sacrifice it takes to truly be great, to your point. What did a day, week, month look like for you when you were at the peak of your game?
I'll start by starting off like this, right? You get 2 choices, and it's the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. You only get to pick one. If you're chasing something, you get to pick one of those things. If you don't fully commit, you don't have that discipline, you will have the pain of regret at some point. Yeah. If you fully commit, you will have the pain of discipline, of the hard work, the long nights, the early mornings. You'll have all that. But for me, like when I was training for the Beijing Olympics, so when I was in that training cycle, it's usually a 4-year cycle. I started that at 14 because Beijing was August 2008. So I would have been just turning 18 going to that competition. Right?
So awesome.
Like super young, right? 4-year cycle. And I didn't even notice, but when I was younger, I used to go when I was like 16, 17, make extra money so I could pay for car insurance and stuff. I would do swim clinics around Ireland, and I would go and I would talk to younger kids, and I would teach them about mentality and stroke, and show them how I do like starts and turns and all this kind of stuff. And the coaches would pay me, and my coach would come as well, and he would do a session for those too. And he said this in one of the sessions, and I was completely unaware of it. In my build up to the 2008 Olympic game qualifiers, I had not missed one single training session in 497 days. Oh my God. Not one sick day, not one late session. And I had no idea. He was like, he did not miss or was late to one session in almost 2 years. Like 497 days without missing one. Yeah. And that would be the equivalent of you doing all your cold calls for 497 days, and your followers and your showings and everything that would make you a great real estate agent or team lead or whatever industry you're in. That's what the equivalent would be. And the problem, like the issue is, like, I didn't even know that. I was just in the element of just doing it. That's my routine. But like my routine, what the day-to-day looked like was Monday morning, I woke up at 3:45. I would drive to practice. We would do dry land training, which is like med ball work, push-ups, sit-ups, like kind of like core work. 4:30
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would take me about 30 minutes to get to practice. So I would get up at 3:45. I would have a coffee, bit of cereal. I would drive to practice for 4:30. We would do dry land from 4:30 to 5 a.m. I would swim from 5 to 7 a.m. I would then do gym from 7:15 to 7:45. I would go to school from 8:30 to about 2:30. This is like when I was in college, not high school. But I would do 8:30 to about 2:30. I would go back to the pool. We would have a gym session again from 3:30 to 4:45. And I would swim from 5 to 7 again, get home at 7:30, do whatever homework, assignments, start all that stuff. And then I would go to bed. And Tuesday was the same. Wednesday didn't have an early morning. Thursday, Friday, Saturday was the same. And I had Sunday off. So that was like my entire week.
Dude, that alone, the lesson that can be extracted from there is this doesn't even apply to it applies to everything, right? Like there's that mentality. I like what you said, right? It's either the pain of regret or the pain of discipline, right? That schedule right there, if you committed to doing anything that deliberately and intentionally, it doesn't matter what it is, right? You could be a fucking Joe Schmo and say, hey, I'm going to dedicate this time to becoming a doctor or a lawyer. I'm 40 years old. I'm going to go back to school and get my degree, right? If you committed to anything at that level for 392 days, you said 492, right?
497.
497. You commit to anything for that duration of time at that level of intensity, you will be great at it in some degree, right? And I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule, but that is wild, man. So peak of your game, you're doing 6 days a week, basically, of intensive work, in addition to school and all of the shit that goes along with being a teenager and your hormones going fucking nuts, right? Mm-hmm. So the peak of your career. So we talked about the work that it took to get there. And you said it took you about 5 years ago to look at that moment, look at all that experience and kind of go, shit, I was at the peak of my game at that point. Was there a moment during your run like that where you were really deep into all the effort and work to get there, where you like looked around and you were like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm here right now? Or did you have a couple of those?
I never had any of them. I never had any, like when I was at like world championships, like it was more people, I guess, was kind of the awakening, right? So I used to look up, I had posters of all these incredible swimmers on my wall growing up when I was a kid, right? Probably most notably was Aaron Pearsall. Anyone that's familiar with swimming would know who Aaron Pearsall was. He was a backstroker. He held the world record numerous times. He was in the game for so many years and is probably considered one of the greatest of all time American athletes for backstroke. And I remember having like his poster on my wall since I was like 12. When I get to world championships and I'm like sitting in the way it works, like you have your pool, they have a separate area for like the heats and it's all separated down like heat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different areas before they call you to walk out. And I'm like sitting there and I'm in heat 5 of 7 and then Aaron walks in and he just sits down and he's like, hey, Karl, how's it going? And I was like, so Aaron, how you doing? He's like, oh, just another day, another dollar. And I was like, yeah, it is what it is, dude. We'll see how it goes. He's like, how you feeling? Like, any injuries? I was like, no, I've been pretty healthy this year. We had a little back and forth. Aaron was in like he was in lane 4, obviously a world record holder. I was in lane 7. I ended up finishing like 3rd or 4th in that race. And then kind of afterwards, my coach was like, hey, like you just raced like Aaron Pearsall. Like that's the guy you've had on your wall for like 10 years. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I'm like just being like all nonchalant and like, yeah, I was like, and he was super cool. We were just chatting earlier on. Like I raced him at University of Texas. He was a Longhorn. So we had you're kind of familiar with all the top people in it once you're at that level, because on the international circuit, you guys will roll into each other, be in the same heats, the same event, like same with Michael Phelps, Ryan Lochte. Was really good friends with Ryan Lochte at one point and lived with him for a little bit in Florida. And it was just, after all of that, you kind of just look back and it's the people that never really got to that step, that good to great step, that are like, dude, you know Ryan Lochte? And I was like, yeah, Ryan's cool. Like I was actually just down with him the other week and we were at the bars and blah, blah, blah. I was like, you know Ryan, like you raced Aaron Pearsall. And then when I started to digest that when I was like 27, 28 and I was like, wow, like I did get to race Aaron Pearsall. I did get, like I was in a heat where someone broke the world record. Like that's the kind of things I like. For me, when I was in a heat, I remember this like it was yesterday. This was in Serbia. It was World University Games 2009, and it was in Belgrade in Serbia. It was the final of the men's 100 backstroke. I was in lane 7. There's actually a really funny picture. I'll show you afterwards. I was like the whitest person in the world, dude. Like, I know I'm still pretty white, but like,
Yeah.
there's like a picture, and it was like an outdoor lucid. Yeah, it's literally like I was like Casper just sitting there, like it's me like Simon on the lane line afterwards, and it's just like super tan person, like pair of eyes, super tan person, and I was like, yeah, that was me. But I remember being in that race, and a guy called Junior Koga from Japan broke the world record, and I get out, and I had done a best time, but like I didn't get a medal. I finished like 6th or something like that, or 5th or so. I think it was 5th.
Sure.
I was pissed. Saw it.
Sure.
It was like my first big international competition, like world level competition that had superstars, like rock stars of the sport, and it like got 5th. And like coming into it, I was like 32nd on the sheet, like in regards to time.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't skip. And I get out. And my coach was like, "Did you see it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did see 5th. Rubbish." Yeah. I was like, he's like, "Junior just broke the world record." And I was like, "Yeah." And I got 5th. Leave me alone. And I just walked off and like sat down. And then like a couple of days later, I was able to be like, "Oh, I guess that's not so bad." But that's how, like, that was the mentality, is like, I didn't win. I'm such a spoiled brat. I didn't win.
You know what's interesting, Karl, is like thinking back on this stuff, dude. I pretty frequently, to that same point, I get told by either my wife or my family or mentors and stuff, like, you need to give yourself some credit, right? And you need to, like, hey, take a look at what you're doing and what you've done, and like give yourself some fucking regard. To that same token, man, there in my brain, it'll never be enough. And there's always room for improvement. And what ends up happening, I talk with my performance coach a lot about this. The world wants to tell us that that's bad right now, right? The world and people and society want to say you need to be fulfilled. You need to be happy with where you're at and not want more. And like, it's, I don't know if it's like just a generational thing, or if it's a society thing at scale, or what it is. But I think that's you said good to great earlier, right? I think that's the difference between good and great, right? I think that's that little thing where it's like, hey, the good boy's never going to stop. And that means it's to some people like, hey, dude, you're going to be chasing that thing forever. You and I talked briefly about that, right? Like, dude, I don't care what the fuck I'm doing. I was talking to my wife the other day about like retiring at some point. And she's like, you're never going to fucking retire. And you know that, right? The chase is going to change to something different, which I'm sure you can relate with. But that good to great thing, has that ever caused you like to be unhappy? Has that ever caused you like, hey, I came in 5th out in the fucking world, right? Out of all these people, and I was ranked 32nd coming in. Has that ever caused you to be unhappy? Because the world right now is trying to tell guys like us and other people that are high performance or want to be high performance, that's the way and path to unhappiness, is never being satisfied. And I disagree with that. I think that that's wrong. I think you can frame it. Has that ever caused you unhappiness, or like leaving you feeling unfulfilled or anything? Or what's your take on that?
I have been disappointed more than I have been excited by being in sports, right? And I have never not felt happy for what I did. Like, I loved every single moment. I loved beating people. I loved winning. I loved not losing. I loved all of it. Did it make me seem like a psycho? Yeah, 100%. But the difference is like that 1% of 1%, dude. This is kind of what I was saying, is that the difference between someone who is like, I was never motivated to swim. I was obsessed with swimming and beating people. I didn't need motivation to get out of bed in the morning.
Give me the chills. Motivation. That just gave me the chills up to the umpteenth degree. That's the difference, man. That is the difference. It's doing something and expecting. People do a little bit and expect a reward. And you're not even, when you're that into something, you're not even thinking about doing it. You're just fucking doing it, right? It's just happening on fucking autopilot. And like, that can be, I can draw similarities with tons of high performance people I know, right? Like, I talked to some really high performance executives recently, and like, the things these people are talking about, they're not fucking complaining about being busy. They're not fucking complaining about being on the road. And like once in a while, I've had these little blips where like, I'm sure everyone at some point, especially when you're truly obsessed with something, there's these moments where you're like, fuck, like I love this shit, but like, is it ever going to stop? And I think that's the product of like the rational part of our brains. It's self-preservation almost, right? Or it's a byproduct of people in our lives, like maybe they're fucking right, maybe they're not. And I always find my way back. But like being around these high performers, to your point, with all Ryan Lochte and Michael Phelps and all these cats, they're all probably just like you. Do you think you share similar mentalities with these people? Like, is that a common trait at that elite level of swimming?
Yeah, for sure. I would say even at that elite level of sport, that's what gets you to the elite level of sport, is that you always want to be better than someone else. Always. And it has to be an obsession. It has to, if you don't, and this is where I was saying to you, like when you were like, hey, I don't think I'm obsessed. I was like, you will never know. You have to ask your wife. You have to ask your family, right? It's because the people that are not in the day-to-day and don't have the mindset, because like, just looking at what you do, right? Even with Human Eyes, I know that 24 hours a day, something about your business is on your mind. That's how I know you're obsessed with it. And if you're not, if you're the person that is on real estate and is a top performer and wins a top performer and then takes 3 months off, you are not obsessed with what you do.
No.
At all. Donovan Reyes, an agent in Las Vegas, solo agent, was closing like 150, 160 deals a year. He was one of my first sales in PA. That dude was obsessed with just winning and being the best real estate agent. Like every single thing he did was about real estate. And I feel like that is such a miss now.
It's funny you say that, because I think people get into the industry specifically for like the financial aspect of this thing, right? Like there's, dude, you can make doctor money without a doctor degree, right? I know real estate agents that are making a couple $1,000,000 a year, right? Which is just insane when you say it out loud. To that point, right? Donovan Reyes, right? In Vegas, to point, like those types of guys, those guys aren't thinking about the money, right? And I think to the space I'm in now, right? In the software space and all this different stuff, people, the people that are thinking about the money, Tom recently told me, dude, Tom has been shoving this down my throat the best way possible. And if he listens to this, Tom, I'm listening to you. The fast money thing is like people chasing that, they don't keep it, right? And that Donovan guy specifically, I guarantee you that dude is never sitting there thinking, why? 150 houses a year? That's a 14-hour a day, 6-day a week job to just maintain that, right? That dude's not thinking about money. That dude's thinking about, how am I going to put another house in escrow? So yeah, man, that's the difference between good and great. If I'm sure you can probably agree with me, the difference is obsession, and it's not a means to an end. You're just doing it on autopilot, not really thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
So, Karl, this will be a great question to kind of end this whole thing. I ask everyone in my life this question at least one point in time, and I've got a note section on my phone that I literally will write this shit down in. So I've asked Tom this, I've asked Greg Schwartz this, I've asked all sorts of really cool high performance people this, and I'm curious what your take is on it. So how old are you now? You're 33, you said?
Yeah, almost.
So if you could go back in a time machine, right, with all the wisdom you have now, you could go back and talk to like a 21, 22-year-old version of yourself, right? At that point in time, you were probably in like the thick of this whole athleticism thing, right? Knowing what you know now and all of the wisdom you've gained in the last 10 years since that spot in your life, what type of advice would you give yourself and why?
Honestly, I've been asked this a few times, and like my answer kind of shocks a few people.
Yeah.
If I could go back and talk to 21-year-old me, I would sit and tell him, don't change a single fucking thing.
That's good.
Like, don't change anything. Like, because what's going to happen, Chris, is that you're going to find more people that tell you don't do something than to do it, because just human nature, the way the mind works, you're there to avoid risk, right?
Self-preservation on a biological level.
Yeah, right. So like for me, a lot of times people would say, hey, like, and especially when I was getting more to my late teens, like I had a lot of older siblings who were like, and like, again, lower middle class family, swimming doesn't pay a lot. Karl, like, you need to get a job. And I was like, no, you need to go get a job. You need to pay. No, not doing it. I'm gonna swim. I'm gonna swim to the level. So I'm gonna get a sponsor. It's gonna help me with my car insurance. Well, you need to get money for this. I'll find someone. Yeah. So you deal with a lot of people tell you don't do things, but again, it's the people that don't really have that switch, that can't fully see what you see, or can't feel what you feel, or don't have that obsession, or will never have that obsession, and because it's borderline irrational to them. So if I could go back and just talk to myself and just like reassure myself that like, look, you're doing the right thing, and this may seem absolutely mental to every single person that you talk to apart from yourself. And like my coach was great at keeping me grounded with that because he was fantastic with that mental side of it too. I would say don't change a thing. Every single thing that I have done from the age of 2 years old to an hour ago has got me to this exact point in my life. I'm good on money. I live in the United States. I'm a US citizen. I've achieved so much more than the people I went to high school with that were out drinking, that were out partying, that were doing all these things, that now work, jobs, get underpaid for, just miserable. A lot of people that I know in high school right now are absolutely miserable. And I was the person that was made fun of for not going to parties, not doing all these things growing up. So I would just go back and reassure myself to not change a damn thing about anything that I was doing and to keep pushing forward.
That is the first time I've heard someone say that. Usually what is said is like, hey, don't be so hard on yourself, or et cetera, et cetera. It's a very common answer I've heard, right? I agree with you. I think that everything in every circumstance, I'm a big believer in the world is way too coincidental to not be, I don't know what the plan is. I don't know who's making the plan up. That part is out the world, right? But I think that it's far too perfect and far too coincidental. And I've had far too many things in my life that just line up, perfect place, perfect time, when I'm ready for it. That I agree with you, man. I think that's a fucking powerful way to look at it. And it shows that you truly don't have any regret about what you sacrificed, right? David Goggins talks a lot about that, like the good to great mentality. And like when people think you're fucking crazy is when you know you're on the right path, right? I've experienced that so frequently recently, where it's like, dude, stop killing yourself. You don't have to break your back doing this. And I'm like, no, you don't fucking get it, right? You don't understand what's going on in my head. You don't understand. I don't feel like, I might look like I'm breaking my back. My wife the other day, I had like 3 hours of sleep between flights and I was like all over the fucking place and had been up for like 18 hours at this point in time. My wife's like, she's like, dude, you look like you're going to die. Like you got bags under your eyes. You're fucking pale. Like, come on, like do something. But I think that's when you know you're really onto it, man. When people think you're fucking crazy is when you're on the right path. So this was a fucking great conversation. I think that this is going to bring a lot of value to a lot of people. And I appreciate you making the time to chat with me, man. I know talking about these things and going down these rabbit holes and stuff is a really personal experience for a lot of people. And it's not something that most people are like, yeah, fuck it, let's rock and roll. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day, man, to go through this with me. And looking forward to continuing the conversation at some point.
Anytime, my friend. Always happy to do it.
Cool, brother.